Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. Nice to see everyone on this beautiful day today. We should be outside. Be nice. In any event, I'd like to just introduce in a moment our speaker today and to just, again, give a preface to why we're gathered and what's the purpose of the program. This is part of the Lil Fader Interfaith Scholar in Residence program that we've established here at Beth Tzedec congregation. The intention of this program is to increase our religious literacy about other people, other cultures, other religious traditions. And so last year we had the good fortune of having Dr. Harjot Singh, representing the Sikh religion, teach us about Sikhism for the whole year. And this year we've taken a little bit of a different format. We've designed the program so that we're exposed to different individuals and speakers with different experiences from the First Nations. And we've had the pleasure of welcoming Ruth Scalplock for 2 lectures, and now we're going to be able to enjoy listening to Casey Eagle speaker, who I had the pleasure of meeting at a panel for the Alberta, what was the name of the organization? The Foundation for Professional Fundraisers. It was a philanthropy luncheon. And we spoke about various aspects of how we understand philanthropy and the values that undergird it. And I was very impressed with Casey's presentation. It sounded as if you could almost be one of our tribe. There are a lot of similar sentiments about contributing and being part of the community. So that was my first introduction. Subsequently, I've learned that you're also involved with one of the programs, the Humanities 101 program at St. Mary's University and the University of Calgary. So Casey's got a lot of experience in communicating the blood tribe history and the First Nations history to various segments of our community. And so I'm very pleased to welcome you today. And we'll have, as we do, some time for questions and answers at the end. So welcome. Nice to have
you. Okay, starna koko tsimiotas. It's again akun, it's akun. Good morning. My Jewish name is Sorhorse. I'm from the Blood Tribe, part of Blackfoot Confederation. But I'm also part Hunkpapa Aglala Sioux through one of my great-great-great-great-grandfathers, many white horses, who escaped the U.S. military during the Indian Wars in the U.S., who then ventured first escaped into Saskatchewan, pound maker, and had a wife there who died after a couple of winters and had some children. So the Tatusis family, the late Gordon Tatusis, and his family is related to me. We did our family tree with him. Then when he thought it was safe, he took off back in the U.S., ended up with the Crow Nation, lived with them for a while, and had 2 wives. The Bear family was one of them, and the Browns family. So we have family down there too. When the young Braves got jealous and told on him and told the military that he was in the area. Then he escaped to Fort Belknap and had several wives. And lived there for a number of years and had many families there. So when I look at myself and I look at the families I have relatives from many different areas because of him. But when he was adopted, when he escaped into the Blackfoot Confederation territory, it was the Blood Tribe that actually adopted him in and protected him and changed his name from many white horses to Weasel Horse. And his firstborn he named Eagle Speaker, and that's where my surname comes from. That was actually my great-great-grandfather's name. And it was the government who came in and said, well, what is the man of the house name? When really our system is maternal. But took a paternal view of it and said, the man of the house, and he stood up and he said, I am Eagle Speaker, and said, and then the rest of your family will be known as that, and we'll give him a white Christian name in front of that. So just a little short history of who I am. I'm also a grandfather of 19, 20 on the way, a great-grandfather of 4. I have 3 children. We adopted one through child welfare. He's part African and Black and Blackfoot of Montana. And we are also in the process of adopting his eldest sister. And 2 days before that was finalized, unfortunately, she was murdered in a gang slaying in Tacoma, Washington. So I have quite a journey. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to find out, who are we? Well, first off, how many of you know an Aboriginal, Indian, or Native person? Okay, can you introduce me to one?
She's not here.
Well, even if she was here, could you introduce me? Because I've never met one. It's a loaded question, I know that. In my language, we say Tzedec, real people, human beings. We do not have any words that say that we're Indian, Native, or Aboriginal. Those are government terminologies of trying to describe what we were. At the very outset, we were considered savages. And that word savage stayed in the Indian Act until 2001, when it was finally removed from the Indian Act. Other portion of that around the human rights issues, the Canadian human rights up until 2002, Article 67 stood out for a lot of our people. And if you didn't read it back then, you're not going to be able to find it now, but back then, if you read Article 67, you read all the 66 articles of the human rights of a Canadian citizen. It told you everything you need to know until Article 67, which said, if you are of Indian, Native or Aboriginal or Métis or Inuit descendancy, none of the above pertains to you. So that really relates to some political ramifications, that we did not have human rights in Canada. It was very limited. So those are issues that plague the people yet. In spite of that, we maintained a lot of our beliefs and practices. Other things that you might need to know is I am a lodge keeper. I run a sweat lodge ceremony that's based upon the wellness of people. And I say wellness because in my language, healing does not exist. Healing is a concept that you get into this perfect state. And our belief is that we don't do that. We can only be in a state of well-being because our belief system says that a lifetime does not permit that. And if any of you, if I was to ask you, can you give me a number of what a long lifetime would be for you?
120.
120? Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else have an idea what that would be? Well, in our belief, a lifetime is a one-day event. Yesterday's lifetime no longer exists. It's all but memory, a place of learning, not reliving. Tomorrow is a place of hope, but it's never guaranteed for any one of us. So a lifetime is what you received when you first took that first breath of air this morning. The things that we do when we smudge in the morning, we say, thank you, Creator, for giving us this breath of air. The first light I saw, the first thing I smelt, the first thing I felt and seen. Everything is that I am alive. I've been gifted this gift of life today. And it's only for the day, so everything we do is very much in the moment, that even our language speaks within the moment. I could refer to a past issue, but it's done in a present tense. I could talk about a future concept, but in a present tense. But what I have is this life I have today. It allows me to know that, understand that every single human being is just one of a kind. We do not have replacements. We can only walk in this world one time and one time only. Yeah, we don't believe that there's a place called hell. We don't believe there's a place called heaven where a Creator lives. We believe that there's a spiritual and physical, and they coexist. And that the Creator is wherever you're at any given moment. But it's that strong belief system that we have that if that's true, then hell is only what a person will create for themselves for a moment in a day. Heaven is a utopian state of mind when something exhilarating happens to you for that moment in the day. And we believe that very strongly, but also know that the people around me are one of a kind, so if they can't be replaced, and not being guaranteed tomorrow, is that I can appreciate all that and who is around me, at every given point in time. That we have families, friends, and relatives, but there are no strangers out there.
Is this just Blackfoot belief?
No, it's everywhere.
Sorry.
So and we believe that, there is no strangers out there. And much like you, we're not strangers. We just haven't met. We're friends. And we walk that path. So where does this all begin? Well, our history says that the Blackfoot Confederation, I'm going to talk about them first, our history goes, our storytellers, and I'm one of the storytellers that carry on the stories, that we go back in history 13,000 years before we migrated out of the mountains onto the Great Plains. This territory here, traditional Blackfoot territory, that Calgary is actually the gathering, centering point of our winter grounds in Blackfoot culture. The 4 tribes would gather here during the winter months. And simply because the Chinook winds were more prevalent and a lot calmer than they are further south. So this was where they would gather along the Bow River. And this is where our people would gather to spend their winters. But our territory was quite massive. Our traditional territory is actually from the North Saskatchewan River in Edmonton, all the way down to Yellowstone River in Montana, where the Rocky Mountain Range meets up with the Kootenay Range, and then 63 miles into Saskatchewan. That is true traditional Blackfoot territory. And a lot of the green spaces here in Calgary, you may not realize, are an agreement between the Blackfoot Confederation and the City of Calgary, that those green spaces would stay that way because a lot of those spaces are still quite sacred to us. It's one of the very few cities in Canada that maintains a lot of green space because of that relationship they have. Unfortunately, some of our lands that we had here, our territories that we had here, especially in northeast Calgary, there are some areas there where there is a sacred burial ground that nobody's been able to find. So the buildings and homes have been built upon that. And of course, there's been aberrations in some of those homes. So we do a lot of ceremonies to help the people understand what's happening around them. So we start looking at that. We start realizing, who are these people, the Blackfoot Confederation? Well, we are the Blackfoot Confederation, and it consists of 4 tribes: the Bloods, the Piegan, the Blackfoot, and the Blackfeet of Montana. The Blackfeet of Montana are actually quite new as being the 4th. The original 4 was still the Bloods, Blackfoot, Piegan, and the Small Robes. The Small Robes stayed within the mountains but were wiped out by smallpox. The Blackfeet of Montana are actually Piegan. When the international borderline was put in place, a greater number of the Piegans were caught south of the border. And in relationship to that, the Canadian government and American government were trying to understand how do we distinguish them when we cannot use Piegans in the south because you have Piegans in the north, and that would be something that would be a nightmare. And couldn't find a plural to Piegans, but used a plural form of Blackfoot and call them Blackfeet. But in language, our language, we just simply identify them as Skapipikanniks, Southern Piegans. And the ones that's outside of Pincher Creek we call Apatsipikanniks, Northern Piegans. And even the names themselves are teasing names. The Blackfoot Siksika people, we call them Siksika, they said that during one of the times of the summer ceremony of Sundance, we're crossing the Great Plains and came across a grass fire that had occurred. Didn't want to soil their moccasins, removed their moccasins, walked across the plains, and got all the black soot on their feet. So when they arrived at the Crowfoot Crossing, they were teased about that when they said, "Skate Siksika, you have such black feet," and kept teasing them. And one of their chiefs only had 1 foot that was blackened by the soot, so they called Siksika, and then the name stuck as the Siksika people, Blackfoot. Bloods, on the other hand, was a practice. It was a ritual that we had that would take red ochre and put it upon our wrists, our arms, our chest, and our face, and you would pray as the sun rose. And we say that the most powerful time of the sun is as it's rising, when it's red. And we often say that that's how the Creator will recognize His children, is through the red ochre, because it's one of the 4 gifts that was given to the people. And we'll be talking about that next month, more about these 4 gifts. But that's how they would pray, so that's what they're called as Ganags. But Ganags wasn't really about that. The Bloods is basically a new name. But Gana means many chiefs. So when they gathered at Blackfoot Crossing during the Sundance, they noticed all these men sitting there with war bonnets. And then people were asking who are all these people with the war bonnets. They start naming them off as their war chiefs and clan chiefs and their head chief. And of course, as slang came out, Scott, Gan, so many chiefs. And that became our name, Gan now. So the true pronunciation. And modern terminology is calling it Kainai. But it's really Gan. The pagans, or Pikani, their name is also a teasing name. They said there was one of fall times when they were gathering hides and the women were cleaning them, and they were getting ready to move because winter was moving. They had to get to their territories that they go out to survive. We're gathering their stuff and tanning the hides very quickly, and we're leaving pieces of hair and fat on the hide yet as they were tanning them. And when they came out with those things, that's when that name came in. Awapikani, scabby robes. It was just a nickname, and that has stayed with them then. So we have since changed that to saying Pikani rather than say Awapikani. So those names come about with that. Now, the interesting thing about the Blackfoot is that they were actually mountain dwellers before, the whole Blackfoot Confederation. In 1984, they took elders who spoke the High Blackfoot language, which is the old language, took some from the Blackfeet of Montana, the Pagans, the Bloods, and the Siksika Nation, and took them up into northern part of BC, into Yukon, close to the Yukon area. Because what they discovered is a Blackfoot tribe up there who have never seen what we call the civilized world, and met with them. What they saw there was totally amazing, what they described and some of the pictures they showed. These people were still living very much in traditional fashion, still using the animals' hides as clothing, changing different things. But they also had a huge number of centurions. From what they could count, there was over 400 people there that were in excess of 100 years old who looked like they were just now entering their early 50s, 60s. And it has a lot to do with the diet of the people. They described the civilized world to them and said they didn't want to be here. Now, the people they took up there had clothing on much like a hazmat, as not to bring any type of disease to them. And even today, they still live there. It's undisclosed, the location. It was actually a pipeline worker who found them, and is born to secrecy. They do have dedicated satellites from the United States and Canada, United Nations, China, Japan, and Russia all have dedicated satellites on this particular tribe, studying how their way of life is. The elders that we spoke to who went there said it was just totally amazing how the relationship they have with the land is still vibrant. And that is the mainstay of our people. And we will use the words of Indian, Native, or Aboriginal for now, but the language is changing to Indigenous. Just to be letting you aware that a lot of our First Nation people are saying we will not deal with organizations or any businesses of any type that uses the word Aboriginal. But we will deal with them if they use the word Indigenous, which allows us to do something. And as I said, I announced myself as being a Blackfoot, part of the Blackfoot Confederation, a blood. That's what I am. Yes, I am an Indigenous person, but I also have a culture called the Blood Tribe, a grouping of people. Here in Canada, you have 624 First Nations across the country. That's not counting the numbered reserves in BC, Métis settlements and communities, Inuit or Innu settlements, villages. When you add them all in together, Canada alone has over 2,000 distinguished cultural groupings of Indigenous peoples. So you cannot afford yourself to say the Aboriginal culture and look at it as an entity of one. And if you add in the indigenous populations or cultures in the United States, then we're up to close to over 4,000 different cultural groupings of the indigenous peoples. So these are things that you have to understand of who we are. Not to look at them as just being Indian, Native, or Aboriginal, because they're not, but to identify them as to what they are. Yes, I am a blood. Or in my language, Nisakanakwan, I am a many chief people. I belong to them and they belong to me, but we have no ownership. but it does help me establish something. In much the same way that you have tribes, you're each distinguished also in those tribes in a different fashion. Not all the tribes are the same. So one of our historical perspectives that we start looking at that, what are we? To understand spiritual practices and beliefs that we'll talk about next month is to set that up for you and saying that your first and true identity is just being a human being first. That is your true identity. Your sense of belonging is knowing that cultural grouping of people that you come from. In my vision, the way I see the world, there is no white people in this world. And I've often thrown that out there. How many people can say they're white, black, red, or yellow? And I disprove them at every time. You may have come in here believing you're white, but if you take a look at that tablecloth on the table, you certainly don't match that. Okay. So we have a belief system, say that all human beings are created equally in the image of the Creator. And it's not the physical body, but the spirit within us. The Creator is a great spirit. And I think every religious grouping has referred to the Creator as a spirit at one time, great spirit. Every spiritual grouping refers to him as a great spirit, but everybody also has a name for them. Some call him God, some call him Allah, Buddha, but it's still one and the same entity. And it's a piece of the Creator's spirit that exists in all of us. It carries no color nor gender. It's a spirit. The Creator, in our sense, we don't know what gender the Creator is. We just know it's a great spirit. Oh, don't take me there yet. But our bodies, on the other hand, are a gift from Mother Earth, and it will go back to her. You know, and I've heard that in religious sectors where they say ash to ashes, dust to dust. Yeah, I guess in some sense we say the same thing. But we have a different view in saying that, yes, your body is a gift from our Mother Earth, and it will go back to her. That's who owns your body. It's just a temporary shell for you. As being imperfect beings, we have to be perfected for our journey home. What we consider home here is not a home. It's a temporary setting. Home is when we enter the spirit world and walk with our Creator. That's home. In the meantime, we look at your body. Your hair on your body is to represent sweetgrass that grows on the prairie. Your skeleton, your bones represent rocks and ceremonies that are used in ceremonies like a sweat lodge. It also represents the mountains. Your arteries, veins, and vessels, your rivers, streams, and creeks. Your heart will pump and pulsate like the core of a mother does. Your breath is the wind. Your tears are the waters upon the earth, and they're very healing when they're allowed to flow freely. In the sheet of shell you carry is like a mother. White and gold sands, brown and black souls. Just 4 different shades of brown. That's what we are as human beings. When we look at that, we start looking at how do we relate to that. Well, if you look at the history of our people, the relationship to land was critical. What we do for her is what she can do for us. And understanding that relationship, that this is where our life form comes from, and to respect that. We respect our mother, the earth, as much as we respect our mothers who brought us into the world. That even in ceremonies, there are certain symbolisms that we do, like the Sundance I run. The ropes that the men have coming off the tree symbolize the umbilical cord to our mother. So there's a lot of different things that we practice and how that relates to us as a human being. But first, I must understand the earth. I must understand that everything out there that the sun touches is animate, sacred, alive, and has a spirit. Even a simple little pebble is alive and is full of spirit. In fact, it symbolizes a great strength, something that we lack. It's not about the size of our biceps, but the size of the heart and the power of the heart that you carry. It's that strength within that driving force. So our people look at that. So when we speak about that in languages, and we look at that cultural aspect of it, the historical aspect, how well do we relate to the land? Our languages have no definitions. They're very descriptive and meaningful. In Blackfoot, I might say March, we may have our spring blizzards. So how would you describe a blizzard, other than the ones in Dairy Queen? So what would you say? What is a blizzard?
Snow and wind.
Yeah. Yeah, violent snowstorm, frigid cold. So you're looking at all those negative things about it, and yet we'll say makeipi. It describes a storm that's coming in. It's about a foot off the ground with swirling snow. It's wet, it's cold, there's frigid, freezing temperatures right behind that. And it's coming through the land. And we see that coming, and yet we see that as something positive, because that's the last walk of old man winter. That's coming in to kill off the diseases so that new life may begin. That's how we see that storm. We don't see it as being negative. Yeah, so we look at that positive feature. So historically, our people will look at the positives rather than the negatives. We acknowledge those negative segments. So even in teachings, when we teach our young, we will acknowledge what they've done right, but we will focus on what they could do better, how to improve themselves. We'll look at those mistakes. We teach them that mistakes are the greatest teachers we have. These are not the failures that we have. The failure is not learning from those. So we teach them, yes, you've done great here, but it's not for you to get a great ego out of it. It's to acknowledge that accomplishment, but here's what you could do differently to increase what you're doing here, to build that capacity within what they can do in life, to appreciate what they are as a human being. You know, to open themselves up and say, I need to get outside the box and see what life is all about. It's not like a person jogging every day through Glenmore Park. Probably have never seen too many the foliage on there, shapes and sounds. They're too focused on that one path in front. And the human being is doing that constantly. They're always focused in one direction without taking that breath to take a look at what's really around them, that 360-degree view of what we call life. Our history talks about that and says we have to be able to appreciate every aspect of that. You have to be able to look at what's out there. Just on Hull campus where I work at, there's about 38 different types of medicines that's growing on the campus there. Even out here, there's medicines out here that most people would walk by, not realizing what that can do for them. Even some of the moss that we use, we go towards the mountains. You find a lot of it around Bragg Creek. We call it the old man's beard. You smudge and breathe in the smoke, which is done for a purpose. Chinook headaches and migraine headaches. And once you inhale that, you're great for another 3 or 4 months. It's stuff like that that people take for granted. They don't see the value of what's really out there in that connection to the land. Understanding the essence of water. You might see water as being one, and yet we could describe water in Blackfoot. There's about 48 different ways that we describe water by using the exact same word. It's just depending on the situation at that point in time. Much like the Inuit people have 1,001 descriptions of water by using the same singular word. Everything is in that present tense. So when we talk about that from historical aspects, we start seeing that. Now, who are these people? In 1996, anthropologists, world leaders at the University of Calgary did a seminar. And at the final table, when the panel was asked by one of the students, what would the Aboriginal people be like if they never did have European contact? The panel sat there for a while and came back with a summary and said, we have to answer that in 2 parts. First off, if there was to be a Garden of Eden, then what we now know as North America would have been the Garden of Eden because of the relationship the people had with the land. Secondly, they would have been the most advanced race in technology as we know it today. Our people are very unique when it comes to DNA. We have an extra gene in our body that no other race of people have in the world other than the Aboriginal people of Australia. When we adhere to that gene and the needs of that gene, our people would be extremely healthy. We would not have labels of ADD, SD, FASD, or anything like that. We would have people who would not be prone to early death. We'd have a lot more centurions amongst us. If you look at the history of the people, they never really had Alzheimer's or anything like that in their history. We didn't have anything beyond a cold. Just a simple cold was about the worst our people ever suffered because of what we could do with the land, how we understood the land. So if you take a look at that, anybody know who John C. Crapper was? Well, John C. Crapper was given the credit for creating the toilet in 1903. So if you ever wanted to know where the name Crapper came from, it was named after him. And yet in BC, the city they're uncovering, they discovered is a major trading mecca, because prior to any European contact, there was no any history of any great Indian wars. Anthropologists have yet to discover any evidence of any great Indian wars. What they've discovered is those intricate trade routes throughout North and South America, including the land bridge. In one of the buildings they've uncovered so far, they have discovered indoor plumbing, dating back 3,000 years. It was also true that the Wright brothers did not invent flying. The Hopi Indians, if you want to call them that, were the ones who invented flying. Today we call it hang gliding. But that was a style of hunting they did, creating these huge kites, attaching themselves to that kite and having two ropes, one on their waist and the other for the game they would get. That was their style of hunting. Then the men would take them back up the cliffs. That was practiced for thousands of years. Architectural designs, the hogans. If anybody ever goes to Arizona, New Mexico, check out one of the hogans that the Aboriginal people built. The last one built was over 350 years old and it's still standing. Modern architects have tried to imitate those and seeing their buildings collapse within 40 years. I think the longest lasting one has been 41. They're still studying the architectural design of that hogan. And if you ever get a chance to see one, you'd be amazed to the architectural design, how intricate that really was. And it makes you wonder where the technology came from. Traditional foods are also not a part of our culture, such as bannock. That is not a traditional Aboriginal food. That's Scottish. We just perfected it. The potato is traditional. That came through the Aztecs. It is a root. And that was done through the Aztecs. So that was introduced to the world. Chocolate, gum, tobacco was all irrigation. So you started thinking about all that and started realizing what would the world be like if the Aboriginal people had been left alone. If technology was at that stage, at that time, much like that structure of the foundation of a home built 2,500 years ago by Indigenous people, you could find that on the lower Fraser River, a square structure of a wooden home built by Indigenous people. Where does this knowledge come from? Who are these people? You start looking at all of that, and I think somebody asked about Tsuut'ina Nation. Proper pronunciation is Tsuut'ina. It's Dene language. They are Dene people who live in Blackfoot territory. Their descendancy really goes all the way down, and they're related to the Navajos and the Hopis and the Apaches. They all speak the same dialect, Dene. And the history of the Dene people, the Tsuut'ina people here outside of Calgary here, talks about a practice, a ritual that some of the main people did up north in the Dene people that was disgustingly horrid to the people, and that was to eat the hearts of their dead, their loved ones, believing they would live through them, an act of cannibalism. So they were banished from the main tribe, and they say one moon had passed, a month, if you want to look at that, the lunar calendar. They decided that they needed to go after these people and annihilate every one of them so the practice would never be done again and would not reflect back to the Dene people of the north. And the chase ensued all the way down to New Mexico, Arizona, Utah area. It was on their way back that the younger group of children were moving faster, and another group of the Dene people were moving a little bit slower. They were a little older and had the elders and children with them as well, and were being killed off by the Arapaho and Shoshone. And when they got into this area, the Blackfoot pitied them and protected them, and actually put them out in redwood meadows and said, you could live here. It's much like the land you came from. You could hunt and fish here. Just don't try to expand the territory we give you, otherwise we will wipe you out. And the reason the Shoshone and Arapaho were picking them off, prior to the Blackfoot Confederation moving out to this area here that we call traditional Blackfoot territory, this was traditionally Flathead, Kootenai, Salish, Crow, Arapaho, and Shoshone territory. Where the Blood Reserve is now, presently, was the last stronghold of the Crows, and the Blackfoot pushed them out. So on their way back, that's when they were put out here. So the rest of the people went north. And what they've done, if you ever follow the Dene people, you'll hear about their fire pits. They have a practice. Every fire pit they have outside, when they get done, they put a stick that's shaped like a Y. That's an indicator of their people. And it's also a marker, because they talk about the holy woman they had who went ahead but got lost. And she had left a mark for them to follow, but then those disappeared. And now they put those markers in their fire pits when they're done to be refound someplace, to allow other people know this is a safe journey, a safe path. Simple little practices that we have. The Nakota people, or Stonies as you call them out in Morley, Eden Valley and Bighorn, they are Nakota. They're actually descendants of the Dakota people of North Dakota. So you have the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And Nakota means Mountain Sioux. They too escaped here into Canada during the Indian Wars in the U.S. There's about 30 of the family names out in Morley and Eden Valley and Bighorn who still have the original names of the families who were brought in and protected by the Blackfoot Confederation and were allowed to live in the mountain ranges. And we're putting those 3 strategic areas saying, live here to keep the Salish and the Kootenai and the Flatheads out. Those are natural mountain passages. And that's where the agreement was made. So they've only been there just over 300 years. So those are a lot of history. That's some of the history that most people don't even know about. Stony really is a terminology used by Jesuit priests. Any tribe could have been called that. Stony is just a style of cooking. That's all it is. You take the stomach of the buffalo, the elk, or the moose, and they clean that and they dry it into a huge ball. And when they want to cook their meats, they would put their water into it, and they'd heat rocks about the size of a baseball until they're red hot. They would drop those into the water, let it boil, and throw their meats in. So that's how they would cook their meats. They would boil it. So that was a style of cooking. That's all Stony means. But they are really Nakota people.
Are they healthy people?
They were healthy people back then. You have to understand, back then we didn't have any diseases of diabetes and TB or anything like that. I mean, that's a lot of what was brought to us, disease that we were foreign to. You know, smallpox was the greatest kill of our people. You know, unfortunately, that was part of the cultural genocide. First, germ warfare was practiced upon the indigenous people in North America. There's an article that one of the professors at the university has, and the actual document coming out of the military offices ordering the generals to pass out these blankets that were infested with smallpox into certain tribes to wipe them out. So the practice of germ warfare has been a long, age-old practice. So a lot of that comes true for our people. But those are things I think we look at and saying, you know, how similar are we? We have a lot of similarities. We all have practices that are similar across the world, a lot of commonalities. After all, we are human beings and we all have one God. We just call him Creator. And it's true in every facet of any grouping of spiritual or religious practice. We have that belief. The thing about the Indigenous people of Canada is that when we do our practices, we have no rules or regulations. We have a belief system. I think but the main driver that exists in all of us is that we're taught that every single human being is their own spiritual authority on how they believe and call upon the Creator when they need Him. That's what we understand. That every form of life is what the Creator has created. And that's to be respected. So we start looking at these people and saying, this is where we're at, this is where we're coming from. That history that we have. We come out to the lands and start saying, what happened to the history of the people? That driving force that we all work together, our people were very community-minded. Everything was for the people, not individual gain. We believe in sharing what we achieve in life. We honored each other for any achievements a person made and actually supported them to go further yet, because we knew what was going to happen is that they would share back to the people. Our culture is very sharing and giving. Any sudden good fortune we come upon, we naturally share with our people, our families. We share it with the elders. We share it for those who are less fortunate. That is one of our gifts that we have to do. It's a very giving culture. It has nothing to do about anything of financial gains. We don't measure wealth in that way. We don't look at materialism with the greatest of value. I can replace a car, I can replace a TV, but I cannot replace the life of a human being. Our honor is at that area, that the life of a human being is more valuable, that you can't even put a price tag on it, that gift called life. So anything we look at, whether it's a plaid car, I heard about that, but those can be replaced. So we don't put great value on that. Even what we call currency. Because historically, we never had currency. We traded. Tobacco back in those days was a great trading tool. It was a medicine. Traditional in its original true form could be used for an open wound to help cauterize it and seal it. I wouldn't do that with today's tobaccos. But in its truest form, that's what it was used for. It had medicinal purposes, but we also smoked it in the pipes, and our pipes are quite sacred. And you never inhale the smoke. Smoke was not intended for the human body to take into itself. That was something we understood back then. But it had that medicinal purposes. So everything we know about the land has a medicinal relationship. Much like, say, the smudge I used this morning, sage and sweetgrass. It's not just for smudging. It also has a medicinal purpose. Flus, colds, sleepless nights. People who have children who may have ADD or hyperactivity disorder, I'll use sweetgrass tea to help calm them down. So, and we do use that. But scientifically speaking, sage has been proven that it does neutralize the negative energy of a human being at the precise moment that the smudge is being applied to them. It cleanses that away. Sweetgrass has also been known that it'll purify the thoughts of a person. And these are scientific studies being done. And these are things that in Blackfoot say, we just cleanse our being in order to call upon the Creator in a good way, with clear thought and a clear heart. So these are things that we have always known. We know that rhythm and song has also medicinal purposes. Those are age-old practices. If we look at Dr. Bruce Perry's work around neurosequential modeling therapeutics, nickname is brain mapping, to deal with intergenerational trauma, we realized that's something we've always done. When somebody was traumatized, there was always drumming and singing. There was always ceremony attached to that. Everything was done in relation to that to bring the brain back into play. So in history, we talk about all that, and we say the people themselves knew how to maintain themselves mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. They knew how to stay within that realm. Today, people are trying to understand that. And yet, it's a simple term. How have you ever heard about having a balanced life? It's an impossible journey. Don't go there. We talk about having a centered life. Being centered in your emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual being. Knowing that those four elements are never going to be in perfect balance with each other. They're going to be always in constant movement. So you can only be centered in that. That allows you to accept the mistakes that you're going to make on any given day. That's what it's supposed to do. It's much like a children's playground, that those old merry-go-rounds that you could spin. And if you look at that, have some people hanging on to certain areas and they're afraid to let go. And they get stuck in just that one segment of their life. And they can't see the other three. And there are some who have the bravery and the courage to let loose one hand and work themselves to the center and sit there. And yes, they'll wobble and weave, but they can sit there almost indefinitely, watching others hanging on for dear life. And don't we do that today? We're seeing people who are emotionally distraught, mentally stuck in one zone. These computer geeks. They forget about the emotional, physical, spiritual needs of their family, and they're only into that little computer box. Or complete physical sports jocks. Again, forgetting about the emotional, mental, and physical needs of others, or spiritual needs of others, as well as themselves. So we understand all that I can only be centered in life. Our people have understood a lot of facts in our history. One of them is very interesting. I throw this at young people. How many lifetimes do you think you've had that you've been gifted with? And that's take the number of years you are. And multiply that by 365. And that's how many lifetimes the Creator has gifted you. But being a normal human being is realizing that 1 to 15% of today, every one of us is going to make a mistake, both natural and chosen. And that's just being normal. The flip side is that 85 to 99% of your day today is going to be right. But if you were to take that grand total of your lifetimes and say that, okay, if I can consolidate every mistake made, it only makes up 1% of the grand total. So despite what we've come through in history, 99% of my life has been right. 1% of it, yes, been some mistakes. Not only the mistakes I've made, but mistakes made towards me. And that's an important thing to look at. When we're going to look at spiritual practices, we're going to have to realize that there were some oppressive and restrictive policies that affected that as well. So I am going to give you about a 5-minute break because I want to get into that. And I know that's going to stir up a lot of questions, but it's also going to take you on a bit of an emotional roller coaster ride. Okay? 5 minutes? So I said we'd cover some of the other historical facts with people. What happened to these people who were thriving at one time and making great gains? What happened to the fabric of the people is something most people are unaware of. Residential school is one of those parts of history here in Canada, as well as the US, that really puts a black mark on what we call the civilized world. We know that residential schools were first initiated in 1620 and ran for 60 years to 1680, and that was done by New France, where take young Iroquois people and take them to France to enculturalize them there and bring them back and send them forth in their communities, thinking that would allow that transition to happen amongst their people, and realize they're being reabsorbed back into their natural cultural groupings, and stopped the practice in 1680. It was then brought back to light in 1858 in the U.S. Resident schools were brought back into the picture. In 1859, Canada started the residential schools, and these start to formulate. But during that time, too, we start seeing things saying that if you look at European contact, that any of you know when actual contact happened with the Blackfoot Confederation? Do you believe that it's only about 163 years old? It's not as old as some people think it is. We don't go back to 1492 with the contact of Columbus. We knew that happened along the East Coast. We also know it happened along the West Coast. And it also happened south of us. It happened with part of our people, the Blackfeet of Montana. During that time, and we look at Treaty of 1855 that was signed in Kalispell, Montana, it affected the whole northwestern United States. We saw the lies that occurred during that time. Then in 1866, they sent a Jesuit priest in to study the Blackfoot Confederation, the Blackfoot people, to see who we were and how they can best deal with us. You have to understand the history of our people goes way back. They were considered to be the most feared and fearsome warriors in all of North America. And they had the greatest allies, the Cree. They were not enemies at one time in history. Also, it was a known fact that the Black Confederation were also known as to be the tallest people in the world at one time. The average height of a man at one time in history is 7'4". Average height of a woman was 6'11". The clan I come from was called the Short People Clan, because the tallest man there was 7'2". I think if I was back there, I'd probably be a midget to them. So, but we look at that, so we start realizing a lot of that history. So you start realizing, so what's going on with this world? Well, we know there's alterations to the food and diet has altered our genetic structure to some level, had us prone us to a lot of diseases, and now it's diabetes being number one. But we started looking what happened. So in 1866, they started studying, the Jesuit priest that dressed himself as a priest started studying the Blackfoot people and said, and went back east after 10 years and went back and said, the only way you can get these people to under control is to ask them to use their pipe. You want to create peace on the pipe. They hold their pipe very highly. They believe that's one of the instruments that the Creator gave them to call upon Him for help, to pray with. You refer to the Queen Mother as their grandmother back east, because in their belief, life begins with the rising of the sun in the east. So refer to the Queen Mother as their grandmother, and tell them that their grandmother is getting very sick of watching all these children dying off and killing each other, because by then Indian wars were prevalent. So in 1877, they came back out with a delegation on September 23rd in Blackfoot Crossing and approached the Blackfoot Confederation and asked them if they could create peace upon their pipes, that their grandmother back east was getting very sick of watching their children killing off each other. And she wanted that to come to a stop. The chiefs at the time agreed that they would do that and created peace upon the pipe, that there'll be no more battles, there'll be no more wars. A result of that promise on that pipe, and because the Blackfoots hold everything they say on pipe so in high regards, that there's nothing they can do, that they will do, to ever break that. So when the Louis Riel Rebellion was going on, he too had asked the Black Confederation for help. Young warriors were going to get up and go to war with that. And it was the old people, the elders stood up and said, you cannot do that. Remember that we created peace through the pipe, and they put their arms down. When Sitting Bull had his uprising and also called on the Blackfoot Federation for help, again, it was the same thing. We will not go to war because we had created peace upon the pipe. They then disappeared in 1877, the signing of Treaty 7, and came back in 1881. And at that time of the signing of the treaty, they said that we would maintain our traditional Blackfoot territory. And came out in 1877 and put them into the reserves, into small pockets, and told them they could not leave there. And again, they couldn't go to war because of the pipe. And this continued going into the new century. An interesting note, many of you know about the Calgary Stampede. Anybody know anything about 1913, the Calgary Stampede Parade? You got to remember, things are still a bit volatile. In 1913, the Calgary Stampede, they were allowing the, as we call them, Indians at the time, to be part of the parade. Well, the Nakota people, Stonies at the time, showed up to be in that parade and showed up with their rifles, firearms. This did not sit well with the Blackfoot Confederation, and they all took off and came back loaded down with ammunition and rifles and weaponry as well. If you look at the history of the Stampede, that parade, the streets emptied themselves within 6 hours, thinking there was going to be a great Indian war to break out between Nakota Nation and the Blackfoot Confederation because of that. And Tzedec and a few others were able to negotiate and calm things down and had both sides put their weapons away, and then the parade started. It had a delay. Most people don't realize that happened here, but that was part of the history that we look at. So, but in 1920, they decided they were going to make residential schools mandatory. They had already had some of the kids in school, but now it's going to be mandatory. Because that was part of philosophy that was brought out. That in order to control these people, you have to take their children. Because everything they do is for their children. And we still maintain that idea today. So in 1920 it became mandatory, and every child, 150,000 plus were taking on that first day to be brought into residential schools. To be brought in and to be turned into white, Christian, civilized members of Canadian society. And gave that duty to several churches to administer that. Substandard buildings, materials were being used. People who had very little or no qualifications were being used to be part of this whole programming. Part of that philosophy that Duncan Campbell Scott and Sir John A. Macdonald put forth was to kill the Indian in a child, was put into practice. 40% of our children died in the first 6 months upon entering residential schools. That was a given. They still talk about 150,000 plus, but the numbers increased because every year there was more and more kids being brought into it. At the same time residential schools were put in place, it was also made illegal for any Indian person to achieve any further education after residential school. Either at the age of 16 or grade 8, whichever came first, you were released from residential school and were told that you are not to pursue any further education. What they taught in residential school was farming, ranching, and homemaking techniques. Very little academics. At the very beginning, first and second grade academic levels was about the highest they could achieve. That continued. I think the first Aboriginal person who challenged that law was Bill Watney, who became a very prominent lawyer here in Calgary. Lost his enrollment rights. He was enfranchised. Never to be considered to be First Nations people or part of the Dene people or the Tsuut'ina people. He fought that battle for years and finally received his membership back as being recognized as a member of the Tsuut'ina Nation only 6 years ago. You also realize that in late 20s and early 30s, the first white policy actually came into place. Because during residential school, you weren't allowed to have education, but it was also mandated under a land lease law of 1896 came into place. Because the people were being given farming machinery from the east that were inferior to the land here, but because our relation to land, we made them work and had bumper crops, some of the finest herds of horses and cattle. That made surrounding communities very envious and jealous of the fact, and said that these savages should not have such advantages of having these crops and horses and cattle. Cities like Calgary, Lethbridge, Toronto, Montreal were saying that this is not right. Savages should not have this right. So then they made it illegal for Indigenous people to have employment. What they told them under the Land Lease Law of 1896, it stated that you, as an Indian person, are never to work your lands, but these lands are to be leased out to non-native farmers and ranchers and into the corporate sector. In return, you as a man of the house, your wife and your children, will now receive a monthly relief check, the beginning of welfare. If you are caught looking for employment or caught being employed, you will be in prison for that, and that relief check will then stop for your family. So you had three factors. You weren't allowed to raise your own children. You weren't allowed the liberty of education, and you weren't allowed the liberty of employment. It was also in 1923 that they also outlawed all spiritual ceremonies across the land. Sweat lodges, potlatches, sundances, every form that you could think of was now illegal for our people to do. But in that same instance, the Blood tribe basically would not allow themselves to go to that point and continued with their ceremony. The RSMP have an archive that talks about a time when they went out there to the Blood tribe to try and stop the Sundance and had their Indian agent with them and the mounted police, and went out there to stop them and came up with their wagons and horses and saw a huge storm coming towards the Sundance. Indians said, well, let's see what these savages will do now. And they say that they described the clouds around it was kind of purplish green. It was a horrific storm coming in, a rainstorm. Watched one of the spiritual leaders come out of the double teepee, what he called the cane. It's a spiritual staff that we call a sacred staff. Came out and went in four directions, basically waving it and hearing him chanting and speaking that satanic language, basically our Blackfoot language. And witnessed the storm actually split itself. Went around the Sundance and reconnected on the other side and had the sunshine in the middle. That, as I say, put the fear of God to the Northwest Mounted Police and the Indian agent and left them alone. One of the reasons why the Blackfoot ceremonies are very strong and vivid today because of that we never got challenged. Other tribes throughout Canada and further north start hiding their ceremonies. If you go further north, you'll find sweat lodges inside building structures because they used to patrol them by air too to try and catch us doing our ceremonies. That was part of the practice. One thing about residential school is that we were not allowed to use our names. We weren't allowed to use our language. We weren't allowed to talk to our relatives. I was known as number 56. Everything I had, my shirt, underwear, socks, shoes, everything had these big black letters of number 56. So if you were there and your number was up there, I'd probably be calling you number 72. You'd refer to me as number 56. We were told our language was satanic. The only language I spoke going into residence school at 5.5 years of age was Blackfoot. I'm just going to give you a very short excerpt of what happened. At 5.5 years of age, going to St. Paul's Residence School on a blood reserve, which is run by the Anglican Church, Walking up there and meeting Father the Wolf, and I can say that because it is my truth. We met him and he greeted us, and I remember telling him, Uki Napi. In Blackfoot, he's a man, so I say, hello, my friend. In Blackfoot, I cannot tell a woman, I can't refer to a woman as a friend. For us, we cannot bring them down to that level. They're above that. Okay, it's very respectful what we do there. And I remember him patting me on top of the head. And we walked in the back office of my parents. And my parents weren't saying much. But I was looking around, looking at all these books, wondering what all this was. And I'm also hearing all this chatter because I don't understand English. And I couldn't understand the chatter going on. My parents signed the paperwork. And then we walked out and watched them leave. They had a team of horses and a Bennett wagon that we came up on. We left that morning, got there that afternoon, and as soon as they disappeared over the last little hill there, hell broke out for number 56. I was literally picked up by my ears and carried into his office in the back, stripped naked and beaten unconscious for speaking the language of the devil. That was to become a daily ritual. The first two English words I ever understood were yes and no, and they were not to disagree or agree. They were to survive. A lot of different forms of abuse happened to me, as well as sexual abuse at age 5.5. Isolation, a small isolation room that I was put into for 22 days because I got caught smudging in the forest of St. Paul. I was thrown there naked on a little mat in a 5-gallon bucket to be used as a toilet, and my food source was one slice of bread and a glass of water once a day. But it also became my sanctuary. I learned how to sabotage to get in there, because in there was this one little window that I could always look up at and call upon the Creator and speak in my language, asking for help from the Creator to pull me out of this nightmare. There's a lot of things that came out of there. What had created me was this creature, a monster that was not me. Because I came out of residential school believing all the abuse, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual abuse I had gone under was how I had to treat other human beings in order to be accepted by God. Because I was led to believe that this man of the church was the right hand of God, that whatever he was doing to me and whatever his supervisor was doing to me was how I was supposed to treat others in order to be accepted by God. That was a very strong belief system. It altered everything I knew that was right. That was a part of a life-altering change. Residential schools finally started closing in 1967 with the First Royal Commission. In 1951, ceremonies began to reappear. They started changing the Indian Act and start changing some of those restrictive policies. In 1955, they removed the next restrictive policy that we couldn't leave the boundary reserve unless you had a permission slip from the Indian agent, which was 24 to 72 hours at length. Violation of that meant imprisonment. We did not become citizens until 1961. Prior to 1961, all the Indigenous people across Canada were considered immigrants within their own lands. That right only came to us in 1961. And it finally passed in 1963. Our Indigenous human rights only came into light in June of 2014. Indigenous human rights, the human rights of Indigenous people of Canada only came to be in June of 2014.
Tell us more. What does that mean?
It means that we, under that, the Indigenous human rights, or the human rights of Indigenous people of Canada, is that we are now allowed to practice our language, our culture, our ceremonies. That we are now to be allowed the luxury that we do have human rights in Canada.
In 2014.
2014. Yeah, less than a year ago. And in February of 2014, the Supreme Court of Canada also stated something that we enjoyed, that the oral tradition of the Indigenous people of Canada is to be considered a legal entity. Any questions? So you understand, yes.
Something that really startled me was, you said that 40% of the children who were in these residential schools died within the 6 months.
First 6 months, yes.
What happened?
Diseases, a lot more unknown factors. Some were beaten to death. A lot of them were also suicides. Suicide became normal as a result of residential school. If I take a look at my history, and I'll explain that, sexual abuse has happened to me about once a week. And I was shamed because I was marched naked through the whole student body, and they were ordered to laugh and jeer at me. So I learned how to hide all feelings, not to feel. So you're shamed in not explaining that. By the time I reached age 7, we had some new kids coming in this junior dorm. It was at shortly the first part of November. I remember there was a full moon. I think it was on the last 4th day of the full moon that we watched these 3 boys who were nightly victims. And I knew where they were going into the back, what they called the room. I woke up, I watched them taking our socks and making 3 ropes. At age 7, I watched them go out to the fire escape, pull the window open, and proceed to hang themselves. I stood there and found, I guess, a relief, an eerie calm, that this is the way you end this nightmare. And it became more acceptable. I did a prayer in Blackfoot, and when I turned around, there was 113 other students in line, and we all did a prayer, and all went back to bed without second thought. Their deaths were put off as consumption, the death. There's a lot of deaths, and there's a lot of, just recently, in the last year or so, year and a half, in Red Deer, they found a group of young children, 14 of them, huddled in a circle, buried.
There were no investigations into that
No,
tragedy?
there was never been any. I mean, the Royal Commission began a lot of that. I can't remember the one doctor who actually did a report, the national crime, talked about that and tried to expose that. But under the MacDonald government and Sir John A. Duncan Campbell Scott, all that was brushed aside very quickly. None of that was ever brought forward. The last residential school actually closed in 1996. The last formal one closed in 2002. So it's very recent history, and it still resonates amongst our people. So the faction that comes out of that is there's a lot of intergenerational trauma. As a result of that, only 3% of our people here in Calgary are involved in spiritual practices now, because the fear of that was brought in through the residential schools. But for us, that is a positive movement, because 4 years ago, it was only about 0.5%. So a 2.5% increase is that it's coming back. And I think once our people get back to what they really believe in and identify themselves as being a human being and knowing their cultural grouping and knowing that it's acceptable, that it's okay to use sweetgrass in ceremonies, that they'll get back to what we understand, that all people belong in a cycle of life, that there has to be mutual and conditional respect for all people from all cultural groupings. Until that happens, we run into racism, discrimination, prejudice of all sorts. And we have to overcome that. And the way we're doing that is to allow our young people to get involved in our ceremonies, to give that back to them, that belongs to them. They are the future. Today we sit at 73% of our children, youth, and families are caught up in child welfare here in the province of Alberta. 73% of them are Indigenous people. 4 years ago, it was only 49%. And it's going to rise again. We are the youngest and the fastest growing population in all of Canada. The average age of our people now is 35. And I think, according to some stats that I've been able to get my hands on, they figured that within 15 years, right now we're sitting at about just over 3 million across Canada. In 10 to 15 years, they figure the population is going to be about 49% of the grand total will be Indigenous. We will affect the face of Canada. We will change how business is being done across Canada. I think that has to be something to look at and to really say that relationship has to be built amongst the First Nations, Métis and Inuits. That has to be created. That has to find that viable bridge and saying, we do have this belief that all forms of spiritual groupings and religious groupings are to be respected. But it's only when a person has found who they truly are in here. So our message to our young people is be a warrior of today. Because their battle is to preserve our language, our culture, our practices. And the best way to do that is to take those weapons that they are now calling, I call them. Education is going to be their spear. Those degrees and doctorates and PhDs are going to be their shield. To be able to walk in today's world and say that I can have a patent leather shoe on one foot and a fully beaded moccasin on the other, that I will become a bicultural human being. That's what we're looking for. I'm driving my grandchildren into that era right now and saying, this is what you have. I have 2 grandchildren right now who really have been no exposure to any form of religion, but are fully engaged in the spiritual practices and know every stage of my Sundance and how that's being done. They know the secret ceremonies that has to be done by men alone. My grandson is into that. And that's all he knows. He's learned to look at people as human beings, not by the shade of shell they carry, but for the person they are. Those are teachings I'm giving them. They need that. It's been part of our old culture to accept all people. We talked about the 4 brothers that were placed upon the world. One to take care of the white world, one to take care of the black world, the red world, and the yellow world. And if you divide the world that way, the black world is all of North and South America and all the islands in between there. That represented the red world, not the people within. The white world was most of Europe and parts of Russia. The black world is Africa, the Mediterranean, Greece, Spain, Turkey, Italy, India, Pakistan. All those areas was considered the black world. The yellow world was China, Japan, Cambodia, all the way down to Australia. That was the yellow world. It did not say that that was going to be the color of your skin. And he said that these 4 worlds, that these 4 brothers would teach the people there and bring the human beings together in harmony. That is an age-old belief of our people. And we still have a strong prophecy believing that that's going to happen. And just so that you women understand this part for us, our philosophies and our prophecies state that the 1,000 golden years will begin when all the world powers that we know are led by a woman. Because our belief is that women are the strength. They are the backbone to their family, to the community, to society as a whole. That's why we look at the Rocky Mountain Range that runs the full length of North and South America, just changes names. We look at the Rockies, we see them as the backbone of our mother, strength. Because it's woman who brings the human being into the world. Men don't have that gift. Women have a deeper understanding of life than men do. That's why it's so easy for men to go to war. And twice as difficult for women to even think of going to war. That's why there's a sacred bond between a woman and child. It doesn't seem to exist with men. Unfortunately, men were like gardeners. The best we can do is plant the seed. It's our mother, the earth, that brings that seed to life. And that's the best it'll ever get for us. Those are teachings that we carry. It's understanding that essence, that life is truly a gift. And when we gather next month, I'm going to go into those beliefs and into those spiritual practices that's really going to bring that to the surface for you. And by the way, those 5 men and that one woman that did all that damage to me, I now consider the greatest teachers I've ever had because they taught me how not to treat a fellow human being. I have long forgiven those 6 people because I forgave this person first. So thank you. Questions? Yes.
Are there sufficient resources available for Indigenous youth in Canada that want to reconnect with their spirituality, or are there a lack of elders and a lack of teachers who are available with that knowledge?
They are there, but we also have to understand that when we're dealing with the Indigenous youth, or Indigenous people overall, there's 3 types. Ones who are involved in their cultural practices and traditions, those who are searching, and the third group are those who are in denial. And those are all created through the residential school. So trauma, intergenerational trauma, is really prevalent. So when we're looking at that, the reason why the numbers are so high in child welfare and in the justice system is people have been looking at symptoms. They look at alcoholism, drug addiction, gang violence, family violence. They're looking at all of that, and yet those are just symptoms. The core is dealing with the traumatic events, the traumatic history, all the trauma they've incurred. So at Hull, we've developed a project that is now a program called Braiding the Sweetgrass. And that's to deal directly with intergenerational trauma and educating young parents about the behavior patterns that they may have adopted from mom and dad and grandparents because they had taken that from residential school. In fact, one of our elders who said, I stood there one day and I raised my hand to slap my children when I realized I don't have to do this no more because I'm not in residential school anymore. Because our true history is that you never strike a child. You teach a child. There are no such things in our beliefs that there is time out for a child. A lifetime being a one-day event. That when a child has made a mistake, that's quality time to teach them what they could have done right and teach them what they had done wrong. The consequence is maybe spending an hour with you to do something constructive. That's how we taught our children at one time. That's how I taught my children. I don't lay any expectations on any of my grandchildren. I didn't do that with my children. I'm not doing that with my great-grandchildren. My 3 biological children, when they asked me what I expected of them, I said one thing to all of them. The only thing I expect of you is just to be happy in whatever path you choose in life. Whatever that looks like, as long as you're happy and you're able to achieve whatever it is you're desiring, that dream that you have, that's all I'm looking for. I said, when I look at that, I'm basically telling you, when you can define your future, it'll define who you are today. When you can clearly describe your dream of the future, then create the human being that's going to make it real, and that's you. Because you cannot become what other people say. You need to become what you're meant to be. Because I never knew what that was. But I definitely understood what my future looked like, and then I created a person that was going to make it happen. That's true for all people.
What percentage of your people are getting into the higher education?
That has been on a sharp increase more and more. If we go back in 1972, we had the first Aboriginal woman graduate out of University of Calgary. Her name was Evelyn Eagle Speaker. That was my father's first cousin. She was the first one. She also was the first Calgary Indian princess, or Calgary princess, Stampede princess. So she was the only one. In today's standards, we're probably looking at, we've gone into a few thousand graduates every year across the country, and that's increasing. In Canada alone, there's over 600,000 individual Indigenous entrepreneurs. The group of 9 are multimillionaires. The oldest one is what now? He's 34, the youngest is 27. And they make millions of dollars. And they started their own diamond mine up in the north, and they're giving back into their community. Their community has no substance abuse whatsoever. They have no problems with family violence or police force. They're becoming very vibrant. So they're becoming more, as we say, allowing themselves to become more real, what they have around them, and reconnecting with the land and the people around them. When you allow people to become real again, you find great success. You cannot do capacity building when everybody already has capacity. You just have to empower them to take the first step. So it is rising. I don't know what the percentage is, but it is rising every year.
Human rights Act, it seems like you talked about this, how did that make a difference in day-to-day life?
Okay, I'll give you an example. My daughter had a heart attack on December 5th of this year, and we had to get a medical flight on the 10th of December from Kalispell, Montana to here to the tune of $76,000. So as I looked at her, she was going to die within 24 hours. An individual in Kalispell who had heard me talk at a couple of seminars through Suncor came forward and said, I'll pay $74,000 with the bill as long as I pay the $2,000 in fuel, which I did. My granddaughter, who was born in the U.S., trying to get her into school up here, we couldn't find a way, an angle. So what I threw at the CBE legal department, I said, under the human rights of the Indigenous people of Canada, guardianship is a traditional law we have. It does not require legal court documentation for us to have guardianship. Under that, I think we have a guardianship that allows us to have her enrolled in school now, without having to go through a series of procedural red tapes. They dug into that, and within 4 days, they came back and says, under the rights, that is to be honored and accepted as legal entity. Those are what's happened. And the fact that it does say that we must maintain the language, the culture, and ceremonies, that must be offered to the people. That's no longer illegal, that is open. That's also opening a lot of doors for a lot of young people to say, you know what, it's okay now, I can go back and learn now. I will not be ostracized for that. That it's actually being coaxed by teachers and other leaders in the country saying, this is what you need to go do, find yourself. What people are realizing is that when Indigenous people are given that power to achieve, they excel. The greatest foe that our people have is the fear of success, because success had a great price, devastating price to it. And now we're seeing the other side of it, that it's okay to be successful.
What's the sweat lodge and who goes?
The sweat lodge, the one I run has 16 willows that I bend. They're planted in the ground. They're diamond willows. 13 is the minimum because it's supposed to symbolize woman. The 13 willows, the 13 full moons, the 13 cycles of women on an annual basis, the menstrual cycle we talk about. Mine has 16, 3 extra for support. And I take 14 willows and I put them horizontally to represent the ribs of the buffalo. Because we follow the buffalo for many different reasons, but it talks about going into the storm. And I'll describe that next month, so I'm going to just leave it at that point. And then we covered it. One time it was high, but now I cover it with blankets and canvas, and it's pitch black when we get done with it. We heat rocks on the outside of it to red hot, and we bring them in, certain numbers through 4 rounds. And it's all about healing. Some people, I guess you can't really describe a sweat lodge experience unless you actually go through it.
Is it a one-day affair?
It is, no, it's a one-day affair. It's for a few hours. It's actually our oldest and most important ceremony we have. And that goes through the story of Scarface, which is also next month.
So how do you qualify for it?
It's eye-open to anyone who wants to go. So I have it every 2 weeks.
Beth Tzedec sweat lodge. I'm already ahead of you. I already thought of that.
Are they separate for men and women? The lodges?
Mine's co-ed. During the Sundance ceremony, they are separate. Because there's separate teachings for women and there's separate, aside from the men, they cannot be taught the same.
What makes you qualified to have a sweat lodge?
My years of sun dancing and understanding our culture and ceremonies. Sweat lodge is key because you have to earn the rights. The teacher I went through has had, well, he's passed now, but before his death, he had over 3,000 people go through his sun dance. 17 of us qualified to have sweat lodges.
Do non-Indigenous people attend those?
We have sun dancers who come in from Europe every year. From Germany, the Czechs, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Africa, India. We've had Japanese sun dancers, we've had Chinese sun dancers, we had Zulu sun dancers, we've had Aboriginal people we had Maoris. We do not exclude anybody from ceremony because that is the way that they would say, I am going to sacrifice for the people. And we'll talk about that next month more in depth and describe what that's all about. You might be shivering when I get to certain aspects of it, but
Yes, I just want to thank you for a very enlightening and I think everyone's going to walk away just thinking about all the wisdom that you imparted today. Beautiful sentiments that really will challenge us, and that we look forward to next month. And I hope everyone here will bring some more people. This is really an amazing insight. Far exceeds, I think, I'm on the beginning level of learning. Some of you may have more knowledge and experience, but I think we all have just grown exponentially today in terms of our appreciation and understanding of what you presented. So thank you so much.